All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to go ahead and begin with our next presenter. Before we begin, I want to thank those of you who are out there watching us live on Zoom, and thank you for your participation. We also want to thank everybody who's here live, that you really care enough about what our history is, that you're here live to hear the alternative truth, may I say that? To hear a different perspective, and hopefully you'll leave for this conference with information that will help you be able to see things differently, to have a different perspective on things, and be able to maybe make you want to go out there and dig a little deeper, unfurl the truth. It is now, I want to go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Don Ratliff. I'm part of the JFK Assassination Conference. You can't hear us? You can't hear us on Zoom, or you can't hear me in... Oh, okay. Well, that's it. All right, I will talk a little bit louder. So my name is Don Ratliff. I'm on the board of directors for the JFK Assassination Conference. I'm here working with David, JFK Historical Group, and David Knight with Project JFK, and working just to bring this information to you. And I'll be your MC this weekend. And it's now my honor to introduce Ed Tatro. By a show of hands, is there anyone in the room who does not know who Ed Tatro is? I see one person back there, and I know he does. Well, for those of you who are out there on Zoom who may not, Ed is a living part of the JFK assassination history. He's been a researcher for longer than I've been alive. Well, maybe not exactly, but for a long, long time. And I want to give him a special presentation because he is somebody who has lived and breathed this for the longest time. And let me go ahead and read his bio. Ed Tatro taught high school English in Quincy, Massachusetts for 38 years. And for 30 years, he taught college and adult education courses about JFK's assassination. He has done presentations on JFK's assassination at Harvard, Boston University, Bryant College, and many others. He has authored numerous research articles pertaining to JFK and RFK's assassination, and contributed research leads to James Douglas' forthcoming book about Robert F. Kennedy's assassination. Ed was the original editor of Texas in the Morning, the memoirs of LBJ's mistress, Madeline Duncan Brown, who considered him her adoptive Yankee son. He authored part of the prologue and foreword for Phil Nelson's Who Really Killed Martin Luther King Jr., The Case Against Lyndon Baines Johnson and J. Edgar Hoover. He attended Clay Shaw's trial in New Orleans, 1969, and at 22 years of age was given access to court exhibits by the trial judge, Judge Edward Haggerty. During the 1970s, Ed contributed research to Senator Sam Ervin's Watergate Investigative Committee, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and the National Academy of Sciences. Ed was a consultant to Oliver Stone's movie JFK, and in 1995 testified before the Assassination Records Review Board. Ed's testimony to the ARRB led to the release of the unidentified fingerprint on the box in the alleged sniper's perch in the Texas School Book Depository building. And his work with the LBJ Library led to the release of the rough drafts of the National Security Action Memorandum, NSAM 273, which he shared with Colonel Fletcher Prouty, who shared them with Oliver Stone for post-JFK research. Ed has received both the Justice for Lee Harvey Oswald Award and the Ed Treefrog Sherry Award, presented by the JFK Assassination Conference. Ed was a consultant for Nigel Turner's The Men Who Killed Kennedy series, which was broadcast on the History Channel. If you can't tell by now, this is only part of his resume, but I don't want to take up all this time telling you who he is. I want you to be able to hear from his own mouth who he is. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a very warm welcome for Ed Tatro. Take it away, Ted.
Okay. Let me see if I can get set up here. This is an impossible task for me. First of all, I want to talk about the fact that there's a new magazine. It's about 12 issues have been out. It's called Garrison Magazine. It's about politics. Okay. And I've been writing articles right along. I'm not in the first issue, but I'm in every one of them since. I have a huge article in one of them about Jack Ruby, a huge article about that scumbag Leon Jaworski. We always talk about the Kennedy assassination being 60 years of shit. He was involved with World War II, so he's involved with 80 years of shit. We've got, I have one that I'll be talking about tomorrow, the TFX scandal, and this is going to be the one that's coming out this April, Lyndon Baines Johnson, Master of Outrageous Acts. I've got about 125 pages of text here, and I got an hour, and there's no way I can do it all. And this is my first shot at doing this in a long, long time, so bear with me. I did teach for 38 years, and I believe a teacher is one who takes his students on an experience they couldn't have taken themselves. My job is to get you people, even the old pros, and they are old, aren't they? My job is to get you to say, I didn't know that, or I hadn't thought of that. So that's my job. At any rate, we all should hope that Casey Quinlan recovers. He had a terrible automobile accident, and he's a great man, and he's coming along, but it's a tough thing. I also, guys that you wouldn't know that helped me considerably back home in Massachusetts, Jonathan Burak and Bill Cheslock. I know Bill's watching on Zoom, so there you go, Bill, you get your little kudo. And Rick Russo, who knows more about the medical evidence than just about anybody on the planet. I have DVDs of presentations I've done through the years that I'll be selling. I try to offset my costs. So if you're interested in that, you can see me during the week. Okay, so I did an article called Lying Lyndon and the Silver Star Scam, and I'm going to talk about that briefly because that's one of the major outrageous acts. And then I'm going to go through like a Gatling gun. Bang, 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 bang. And don't shoot the messenger. I didn't say all the things that this guy said. Okay? So anyway, and before I begin, I want to say a few quotes. Since we have Dr. Newman here. The article on LBJ's outrageous acts, my original article, or you want to say my original essay, was written in the early 2000s, and I gave a presentation at COPA, which I have here, and sitting beside me before I spoke was Malcolm Blunt, one of my friends for decades, and Malcolm said, can I read that? And it was probably like 60 pages, and he can read like Mr. Spock. I mean, and he took it in like 5 minutes later. He looked at me and he said, that's the greatest overview of Lyndon Johnson I have ever read. And coming from one of the great giants in this subject is a great compliment. And so what I just said to you is in the opening of this new article. So he's got a new book out with Dr. Newman in it, and so I'm pushing that for them. So anyway, let's begin with his quote. The JFK assassination is the huge dam behind which all government lies are safely held. Okay? All right, now let's go through a few. I can't do them all here, but because I don't want to waste time on it, but a hypocrite is the kind of politician who would cut down a redwood tree, then mount the stump and make a speech for conservation. That's Adlai Stevenson, okay? Nothing can be said about politics that has not already been said about hemorrhoids. Politicians and diapers must be changed often and for the same reason. Okay, and this is from that television series, Homeland Security. These are the people who can rewrite yesterday's weather. Okay, yeah. And I got one here that I think is very important. Will Rogers, you can't fool all of the people all of the time, but it isn't necessary because they beat us, and they beat us, okay? And I think I probably should throw this out. The Kennedy assassination was the end of faith in government, and so it's up to the little man to fight the odds. Davy Crockett, Sisyphus pushing his rock. Someone has to keep fighting the odds. And even though you know the chances are that you're never going to get a resolution to what you're fighting for, you have to fight for it anyway. Just the principle of justice, just the principles of American democracy. Don't give up. Keep fighting. Me, 2003, on The Guilty Men on the History Channel. Okay. I could go through a million more, but we should get down to business. I should quote Jonathan Swift here. Laws are like cobwebs, which may catch small flies, but let wasps and hornets through. Anyway, with that said, I brought this chair up so I have someplace to discard everything. And I got a lot to discard. Okay. Let's see here. And one more quote here. A lie can travel around the world and back again while the truth is lacing up its boots. So we have to do that. In order to start it off here, we have to start with the fact that Lyndon Johnson was a liar. He was an incredible liar. I could stand up here for an hour and just talk about all his lies. In college, he was such a liar, his college roommates called him bullshit. That was his name, Bullshit Johnson. It was even in one of the yearbook type things. And once he became powerful, he tried to get them all cut out. Okay? He was known, it was famous, the credibility gap, because he kept lying about everything. He claimed that his ancestors were in the Alamo. And Robert Shurrow, one of the great writers in the 60s, said, the list of those who died in the Alamo was well known. And if great-grandpa Johnson was in the fight, he was on the side of the Mexicans. Okay. So with that in mind, I want to quote a few folks. Bear with me, because it's a page disaster here trying to do this. One of the great writers of the 60s was George Reedy, Lyndon Johnson's press secretary. And, he nailed Johnson time and time again. I'll be quoting him throughout this hour. And let's see if I can find the one I want here. Let's see. Johnson, this is about the Bobby Baker scandal. Johnson adopted this line that he hardly knew Bobby Baker. And I think he tried to convince himself that the line was true. You know, one of the things about Lyndon Johnson that you always have to be careful about, whatever Johnson tells you at any given moment, he thinks is the truth. The first victim of the Johnson whopper is always Lyndon Baines Johnson. In his own mind, I don't think the man ever told a whopper in his whole life. And once he came out with that line that he hardly ever knew Bobby Baker, I think he decided in his own mind that he didn't. Okay, and that's his press secretary, not somebody who, not a Republican, not somebody who disliked them. It's, you know, right on the button. Anyway, all right, let me go through that, and I want to, I should quote Bobby somewhere in my little pile. Here's Bobby Kennedy. He never called him Lyndon. He never called him president. It was, he wouldn't call him the president ever, all through the whole ordeal. Okay, let me read this. Well, as I say, I try to get him off, meaning the vice presidential ticket. I tried to get him off. He wouldn't go off. I'm sure he wanted it as much as anybody ever wanted anything. Johnson is, as President Kennedy said, Thursday night, November 21st, 1963, incapable of telling the truth. I mean, I had a conversation with him at the White House in '62 at one of those dances after a dinner, at which he said he never tried to beat the president. He never ran for president. He was never interested in being president. He was just interested in helping John Kennedy. There were people he couldn't dissuade right away, but he never lifted a finger himself, and that he never heard anybody say anything bad about President Kennedy, that he never knew John Connally saying anything bad. And in my experience with him since then, he lies all the time. I'm telling you, he just lies continually about everything. And every conversation I have with him, he lies. As I've said, he lies even when he doesn't have to. That's Lyndon Johnson. Okay, let's see where we want to go from there. Now we get to World War II. We were in war in the South Pacific at a place called Lae, L-A-E, and there was a Japanese base there, and we wanted to take it out. And FDR was fond of Johnson and was grooming him for the presidency, so we put him on a fact-finding mission on one of the planes. And there was a whole series of planes. I don't want to go through all the details of it, wouldn't do it. But Johnson was going to go on a plane called the Wabash Cannonball. And he got on, he had a camera, and he had a parachute, and he realized he had to take a leak. Okay? This is June of 1941. So he got off the plane, he took a leak, he came back, and there was another fact-finding guy there, Lieutenant Francis Stevens, who took his place. And Stevens said, go find another plane. So he had to go get another plane. He got on a plane called the Heckling Hare. He left his camera. He left his parachute. Okay. Later, he said he gave his parachute because he didn't need him, was so brave. So there we go, whopper time. All right. So at any rate, the battles take place, and the Wabash Cannonball gets shot down by the Japanese. Stevens is killed. If Lyndon Johnson had not taken a leak, John Kennedy might not have been killed. Robert Kennedy might not have been killed. Nixon might not have been president. Ford might not have been president. The Vietnam War might have stopped over a leak. Okay? 1P. And it gets worse. After he got back to Hawaii, he met with the head of the South Pacific named Chester Nimitz. And Nimitz said, I'm going to San Francisco. I got a place on my plane. You want to go with me? And he said, no, I'm going to stay in Hawaii a few days. So another congressman went with Nimitz. The plane crashed in the water, flipped over, and that congressman drowned. He could have been gone twice within like a week. Okay? So people say there's a God. Okay. Could have fooled me. Anyway, he's on the Heckling Hare, and the plane goes out. It's out there for 13 minutes. It has engine trouble, and it has to come back. All the other planes go, and there was all kinds of shooting, Japanese Zero shooting, and all kinds of things went on, and he didn't see any of it. And the plane comes back to base, and within a very short period of time, he gets the Silver Star for gallantry during warfare. No one else on the plane gets a Silver Star. They didn't get anything. And then in 1962, clowns wrote a book called The Mission, named Caden and Heimoff, saying Lyndon Johnson's this great war hero. And they quote 5 of the men on the crew saying, Jesus, we were shot up. One of them said he had burns in his neck from shells. The plane got all shot up. We have the documents of the plane when they came back. They checked those planes for even one single bullet. There was not one mark on the Heckling Hare. It was a 13-minute ride of no consequence. And that lie stood. Now, in 2001, CNN got a hold of other members of the crew who said, bullshit. It didn't happen. And I could go into great detail if we had time. My recommendation is if this really interests you, and you hate Lyndon Johnson as much as I do, buy the Garrison magazine this April issue, because you can read it all in magnificent black and white here. Okay, next on our little trip, let me see if I can, because I got so many other things I want to go through here. We've got it. And then unfortunately, Merle Miller, an LBJ apologist, Robert Dallek, an LBJ apologist, Rachel Woods, an LBJ apologist, and even Robert Caro, who wrote several books ripping the crap out of Johnson, but he still put in the lies about this phony World War II battle. And that's how they've been able to carry it through. Now, he said, I don't deserve this. Well, he wrote a letter to the military saying, I don't deserve it. But he never signed it, never officially sent it in. It exists in the library, so we have it. But he never sent it in. And then he accepted the damn award anyway. And then from that day on, he wore it on his lapel every day. And when he would meet Vietnam War protesters, I'm a hero, you cowards. So, lies. All right, absolute lies. Phil Nelson has written about this as well, and he contacted the B226 Marauder Historical Society, and in 2010, they had on their website that the medal was contrived. So he used that in his book, and then he went back, like 2019, to that website, and it said, file not found. And they said, oh, it crashed at some point, and we never retrieved the part about the medal being contrived. So somebody got them. Somebody stopped them. Let's see, what else do I need to throw out here? I probably I'll paraphrase it for time thing here. I met Ronnie Duggar, one of the great Texas writers of all time, and one of his best friends is here in the audience with me, who's helped me with this, Bill Bray. And Ronnie, in his book, wrote all about this. Not only did he wear the medal, but he started to embellish. I was in many battles in the South Pacific. He's 13-minute flight, one flight, and then he ends up saying, I was on 60,000 miles, 70,000 miles of battles. It just went hog wild, but nobody stopped him. He just kept going. Okay. I could go on, but I think that kind of serves the purpose so we can get to worse things even. I did, what did I do with it? Hold on a second. I need a bigger table. I was on a bigger boat. See if I can find my, let me see, oh, maybe I can do it at the end. I want to read the last part of this lying Linden thing, if I can. Let's see where I want to start here. Where is it? Okay. I wrote, the old adage, be careful what you wish for, had come home to roost. He could lie his way through college. He could invent an imaginary, oh, here it is. Frankly, it would also, I want to get into it. If there is any justice in this period of history, it must stem from the historical reality that Lyndon Baines Johnson wanted to be president of the United States more than anything else in life. Nothing would stop him, even if it meant incessant lying and manipulating and abusing everyone potentially in his way, even if it meant murder. Only once he made it to the White House, he was criticized and jeered and despised. Just prior to his goodbye speech on March 31st, 1968, indicating that he would not campaign for a second term as president, Johnson told his advisor, Horace Busby, I want out of this cage. I don't want to spend the rest of my life with 16 fellows wearing big guns under their coats, following me everywhere I go. I don't want the whole damn world watching every time I move and listening every time I open my mouth. The old adage, be careful what you wish for, had come home to roost. He could lie his way through college. He could invent an imaginary World War II battle and pretend he was its hero. He could have propagandized his way into the House of Representatives and steal his way into the United States Senate. He could blackmail his ticket to the vice presidency, and he could cooperate with a powerful cabal to snuff out a president's life and cover up the heinous truth and frame an innocent man. He could fabricate an excuse to escalate an unjustified war, killing millions of Vietnamese and thousands of American soldiers. But he could never live up to the spirit and image and lasting charisma of the fallen leader. In the end, the lies and immorality caught up to him, and Lyndon Johnson died a bitter, broken, and lonely man. Justice. Okay. You're very quiet. Okay. Let's see. I think that pretty much takes care of this part. Now we get to the huge one. Yeah. All right. Bear with me. This isn't easy trying to organize all this, but how much time I got? Like 5 minutes, Don? Okay. Let's get going here. Okay, we can skip by that. I talked about that. I wrote a little thing here. Bill Moyer is one of his loyal allies and one of the great creeps in this case. He's responsible for taking the bubble top off the car. He actually said, hyperbole was to Lyndon Johnson what oxygen is to life. That's Moyer's. That's like Reedy saying stuff, okay? Let's see here. Okay. We don't need that. Okay, so let's start going through him here. I'm going to jump around and try to go through them. He was known for having bathroom conferences, especially with people he didn't like. He'd be on a toilet and have people come in and talk to him. And he thought nothing of it. He did it all the time. And Richard Goodwin said, it's the only time in my life where, I had to talk to a president taking a shit.
Including McNamara?
I couldn't tell you how many.
Mary made McNamara go into the toilet with him, and the Assistant Secretary of State into the toilet with him. He liked to do that.
Yeah, I don't doubt your word at all. Let's see here. The next big one, it happened in February of 1961. Johnson ordered 2 pilots to fly his private Convair 240 to Austin Airport to the LBJ Ranch. And it was all clouds. There was limited lighting at the ranch. It was recommended they not do it. He screamed and swore and had a hissy fit, so they followed their orders and they crashed. They were killed. And there was no need for it. And then it's a long, complicated history. I've got it all here. But there was life insurance, and he got the $500,000, not the families. Okay? And I can go on, I got like 4 pages about it, but we just don't have time for that business. And his Brazos 10th Street Company was a shell game with all kinds of tax loopholes and money shifts between him and Valenti and other characters who worked for him. And he always was crying poverty all the time. In fact, one of the great cheap things, his secretary, Marie Firma, said he was so bad in the White House, he used to rewash styrofoam cups, supposedly for save money of some sort. The dog caretaker, Travis Bryant, one of the dogs tore his coat, and he wanted to get it repaired. And Johnson made him fill out all kinds of economic forms and things. It was a $35 thing. And he made him go through all this bureaucratic red tape, and he finally just gave the damn coat away. And then he didn't want to pay exorbitant fees, he thought, for pet food. So he found some cheap place that got food in. Someone said, are the dogs getting too fat? And Brian said, no, the president's pocketbook is getting too lean. Then he decided, he got an $89 vet bill for one of the dogs. So he started bringing the dogs to Fort Myers where they take care of the horses. So he got free medical care for his dogs because he didn't want to pay for it. So, he's not only a liar, but he's a cheapskate. All right, let's go from there. Then we get to another big one. In the spring and summer of 1965, Johnson went public to the reporters and said some 1,500 innocent people were murdered and shot and their heads cut off, and 6 Latin American embassies were violated and fired upon over a period of 4 days in the Dominican Republic. Okay? Eric Goldman, one of his consultants who left in disgust, said, the reports of most American newsmen were that no embassy had been fired upon, no one had been beheaded, no considerable loss of life was visible, and no American civilian was hurt. He sent 22,000 Marines to the Dominican Republic for nothing. One psychiatrist who did an analysis of him said, it was like hitting a flea with a hammer, okay? And Goldman wrote, the only truth in all of this was that there were some fatalities. However, only 2 Americans were shot, and these were a reporter and a photographer who were shot by our own Marines. And the CIA concluded that only 3 communists participated in the revolt, which was his excuse, that it was a communist takeover of the Dominican Republic. The psychiatrist, Dr. Jablo Hirschman, said, the president turned the commonplace event in Latin America history into a manic circus. He sent 3 times the troops needed to maintain peace. He also extorted Congress to provide the millions of dollars needed to support the troops. Any refusal would have looked like the abandonment of American boys. And of course, he faced the Dominican Republic, and Dr. Newman could tell you more than I could. He faked the Gulf of Tonkin, too. It wasn't going to be his last battle that he would fake. Of course, he had a lot of help with that one. One time, a Frank Thompson, a congressman from New Jersey, was at a White House briefing about the Vietnam War, and Rusk and McNamara were giving out statistics. And finally, this Frank Thompson said, "Now, is someone going to tell us the truth?" Johnson got up, walked over, grabbed him by the arm, pulled him to the door of the White House, and threw him out. And he said, "Get out of my house." And Thompson said, "It's not your house." And then Johnson, a couple of days later, called him. He said, "You were right, it's not my house, but you had no right to say what you said." Okay? And he said, Thompson said, "You know, he's a big man, a tall man, but I'm even bigger and taller." But he said, he intimidated the hell out of me. The man was, I quote him, "God, he was a frightening man." Okay? In '61, Johnson's over the Pacific Ocean, heading for Southeast Asia. He gets in an argument with Horace Busby, his writer. He said, "You're fired. Get the hell off this plane." Busby says, "But we're over the ocean." Johnson blasted, "I don't give a fucking damn. You're fired. Get off this plane." And it took Ladybird to calm him down. Okay. He's on the Sequoia, the presidential yacht on the Potomac, and he's watching a movie. And the wind is flapping the screen. So he tells the guy running the boat, "You idiot, turn the boat around and go up the river backwards so the screen won't flip around." Okay. He did this thing all the time, wherever he was. He's at a press conference, and he's with all these reporters, and he just turns and starts taking a leak right in front of them. Okay? He's on the White House lawn. He takes it out and takes the leak on the flowers on the White House lawn. And at the same time, he had guests that were coming to the ranch, and he wanted them to pee on the guest plane, and he didn't. And one of them, he said to Ladybird, "Do you know why I didn't want to stop? Do you know why I wanted them to piss on the airplane? He's got a crooked dick, that's why. Every time he comes here, he pisses all over my bathroom. So it's okay for him to pee everywhere. But if somebody else is peeing on his bathroom, he has a shit fit." Okay. One Secret Service new recruits at the branch were told, "If you hear rustling in the bushes, don't go out there with your gun. It's the old man taking a leak." Okay? Okay? Then his brother, Sam Houston, told this one. He'd get in the mirror and get himself all spruced up. I'm quoting him, remember, don't shoot the messenger. "Well, I've got to take old Jumbo here and give him some exercise. I wonder who I'll fuck tonight." And he was known for having a huge member. Okay? You didn't know what you were getting into here. I'm on page 17. I got 107 pages. Okay? When people would gossip about JFK's sexual conquest, LBJ would respond, "Why, I had more women by accident than he had by design." The Senate office was called the Nookie Room. Okay? He had a Spanish secretary called the Chili Queen in Washington, and at the ranch, he had a woman called the Dairy Queen. He had 8 secretaries. He was banging 5 of them. Okay? Now, I know some men out there going, "Jesus, what a lucky bastard." Anyway, he had a buzzer put in. So when Ladybird was coming, the buzzer would go off if he was with some woman boinking her. So he had that set up. Okay? If he saw pretty women outside the White House, he would send some of his aides out and encourage them to come in to meet the president. He was always on the make, always. In fact, his friends called him, quote unquote, the sexual gorilla. Okay. Okay. And it wasn't just women and sex. He was doing campaign donors, getting money. And he had Nellie Conley, John Conley's wife, on the phone. And he was on the phone with a very rich donor. And somehow Nellie cut his phone off. He took up a book and whipped it at her. It whizzed past her head and thudded against the wall. The governor's wife. Okay. Ladybird gets on a horse. He smacks the flank of the horse. The horse goes flying off. She got back and said, "Don't you ever do that again." And she said, "He did a lot of things he thought were funny that I didn't think were funny." Okay? All right. All right. Johnson was in a car once with Ladybird and another woman. You know, Johnson, the woman, and Ladybird. And he's fingering her right in front of Ladybird. And Ladybird says nothing. Says nothing. He's in Paris at a NATO meeting, and he's got a few drinks in him, and there's some woman there, and she jumps on his lap, and they're groping each other, and Lady Bird's sitting there at the table, and she has to get Horace Busby to go over and say, yeah, you want to break that up? But she just accepted it. Okay, I guess her father was like that, so she expected it. Men are pigs, right? Okay. There's plenty of stories about Air Force One. He's on there, and they had run out of root beer, and he wanted the root beer. So I'm quoting him. Sergeant, how many times do I have to tell you that I want diet root beer on this plane at all times? It's not very difficult transaction. You can buy the fucking stuff anywhere, Sergeant. I want an order sent out to all Air Force bases, stock root beer. He never asked for another root beer. Jack Valenti liked his steak rare, one of his aides. And so they cooked it rare. And Johnson saw it. And he said, he says to Valenti, you dumb son of a bitch, you're eating raw meat. So he went into the galley to the two cooks. He said, quoting him, you two sons of bitches, look at this. This is raw. You got to cook this meat on my airplane. Don't you serve my people raw meat. God damn, if you two boys serve raw meat on my airplane again, you'll both end up in Vietnam. He threw it upside down on the floor and stormed off. And then Valenti went in and said, can I have another piece of raw steak? That's the way he wanted it. Okay. McMillan, one of the pilots, I'm quoting him, I doubt that there was a day in Johnson's life in the White House that he didn't do something that was dishonest. Okay? Where are we going here? One time, Tip O'Neill was with Jack Valenti. And actually, Tip O'Neill was with Lyndon Johnson. And they were talking, and all of a sudden, Johnson yells, where's Jack Valenti? And he finally shows up, and he says, right in front of Tip O'Neill, where the hell were you? And Valenti says, I was getting a cup of coffee. And Johnson screamed, you asshole, I told you never to leave my office. And O'Neill says, why do you let him talk to you like that? I'd never let him talk to me like that. He said, you don't understand. In 5 minutes, he'll forget he even said it. And that's how they did it. Moyers, Valenti, that whole bunch. Cliff Cutter, they took it. They took the abuse. Okay. I'm just trying to hit the things here. He had an amphibious car. And he used to take dignitaries from foreign countries in the car and ride down a hill towards this pond. And then they'd hit the pond and go, the brakes are gone. And they'd jump out of the car into the water. And then he'd drive on the other end and laugh like hell at them. Dignitaries from foreign countries. And Reverend Burley Graham was in his car with his wife, and he stayed in the car. And when he got to the end, he was disappointed. He said, how come you didn't jump out of the car? And he said, you're President of the United States. We figured you knew what you were doing. So Graham's the only one he didn't bag. Okay. He was famous for driving on his ranch, going up to cows sleeping, and driving at them and honking his horn. And if they didn't move, he'd actually nudge them with the car. And Mort Saul said, you start an invented exaggeration about life on the LBJ ranch and then discover that he actually does herd cattle in a white Continental. Okay. He used to get in a car, and the Secret Service agents would be a car behind him, and he'd tell the guy to take off, accelerate to dangerous speeds, and he'd look back and go, look at those bastards back there, and laugh at them. One time he met a Lutheran minister in '68, and he said to the preacher, what kind of a car do you got? And he had an old beat-up Chevy. He said, you need a better car than that. I'm going to give you this new station wagon. It was the car the Secret Service agents were in. He gave it to the minister and then took off and left the Secret Service agents there stranded. Okay. He didn't like George Hamilton, who was dating Linda Bird. So he invited him to the ranch, and he did it with the Kennedys. He made them hunt, and it made Kennedy look bad. But Hamilton was good. And he's dressed in a suit. And he gets down and immediately shoots 2 deer. And Johnson looks at him and goes, why, you're a real Daniel Boone. And then Hamilton said, without any notice or warning, they're standing there after shooting the 2 deer. He turns and pisses on Hamilton's shoes. Okay? I'll read this verbatim since this is a double, because we're talking about King this week. J. Edgar Hoover, who had bugged various hotel rooms occupied by Martin Luther King Jr., managed to obtain a number of audio tape recordings of King engaged in acts of adulterous sexual intercourse. Hoover gave copies to Johnson, who found them so entertaining that he used to play them for some of his cronies. So that's a double, JFK and MLK. All right. We'll skip that. Maybe this is my favorite one, at least on the lighthearted things. He had a friend named Mo Levy, who was a Dallas-based NBC cameraman, and he was friendly with LBJ for years. And he was at the ranch, and LBJ had a goat. The guy loved the goat, kept praising the goat. God, that goat is beautiful. And LBJ, you like the goat that much? You can have him. He gave him the goat. And then he convinced Johnson to do an interview at the ranch. And Johnson said, well, I got some business to attend to, and when I come back, we'll do it. But don't move any furniture. So one of the directors didn't know it. Mo didn't know it. He moved some furniture. Johnson comes back, and when Johnson sees it, he explodes. Mo, get your goddamn equipment out of here now and bring back the goddamn goat. Okay. All right. Then we come to the next big one. His most loyal aide, Walter Jenkins, was a homosexual. And he got busted in a sting at a YMCA. And it took a week for the press to publicize it. Johnson knew about it that day, but he pretended he didn't know for a week. Of course, he made him resign. He put him in a hospital. He had the phone taken away. He was isolated in that hospital. He was sedated him because Jenkins was talking about maybe doing a press conference. He wanted to shut him off. He didn't want to have anything to do with it. Now, the only one who took the high road here, actually two people did, because the Goldwater election was right around the corner. Lady Bird took the high road, said that man was suffering from exhaustion, and we need to support him. Johnson didn't want to have anything to do with him, and he never dealt with Jenkins again until after he had retired as president. Then he brought him back in. So he was... It's safe to say that maybe Lady Bird is the beginning of the gay rights movement in a way, on a political level. And that's, I mean, she's Lady Macbeth almost all the time, but that's one, broken clock is right twice a day, so she was right once. Anyway, he did everything. He tried to say the waiters had drugged his drink. He tried to say he was a non-biological homosexual. He tried to say he had a brain injury. He tried to have the policeman who arrested him fired and indicted, but the people in the courts and that they would not bend. And he didn't get away with anything. The only thing was then he had Moyers see if there were any gays in Goldwater's campaign. I guess there were 3. But it didn't matter because what happened was, the week that happened, Khrushchev was ousted, Harold Wilson, the Prime Minister of England, was ousted, and the Chinese set off a nuclear bomb. So nobody cared about one little guy having a sex scandal, heterosexual or homosexual. And when Goldwater's campaign people wanted him to exploit it, he said no. He said, that man has suffered enough. I'm going to lose my way. Winning isn't everything. So, can you imagine Lyndon Johnson saying something like that? Okay. As a result, there were campaign buttons, protest buttons. LBJ, Lyndon Baker Jenkins, the family that plays together stays together. All the way with LBJ, but don't go near the YMCA. And of course, he did a whole thing where he had all the lights in the White House shut off. And he said he was saving money, taxpayers' money. And while he was doing it, he was having new equipment put in the LBJ ranch, totaling almost $4 million. Okay. In fact, his brother, in protest, when Lady Bird and Lyndon came back from a dinner, he was up in his room in the dark reading with a candle. He ended up putting him in a mental institution. He put his brother away, and he wasn't mental. He had a drinking problem, but he wasn't mental. Another one, Either Way with LBJ. And so we have that. Okay, that takes care of that. He was on a military base, and he was heading for a helicopter, and a colonel said, "That's not your helicopter, Mr. President." And he said, "Son, they're all my helicopters." He was at a base in Harlingen, Texas, and when he got off the plane, instead of being met with a limo, They met him with a hearse. And as soon as he got back to Washington, he closed the base. Okay? I never heard that before. This is from the movie The Right Stuff, John Glenn. He wanted a whole press release thing with John Glenn's wife, who had a terrible stutter. She didn't want to do it. John Glenn didn't want to have to make her do it and, embarrass her. And Johnson couldn't get anyone to help him make her do it anyway. Quote, "Why the fuck isn't there anybody on my staff who can deal with a housewife?" Okay. He told the ambassador from Austria that he was getting visits at 3:30 in the morning at the White House from the Holy Ghost. He went to Rome. The Pope gave him a 16th century painting of the nativity scene. Lyndon Baines Johnson gave Pope Paul VI a sculptured bust of himself. And of course, with the Christianity, no idols or anything, the whole, whoop, okay. All right, we did that. I did that. Okay, I did that. When, they talk about Trump with taking classified documents. Johnson took 10 plane flights to take everything he took away from the White House, including an electric bed out of the Walter Reed Army Hospital. He took out golden cigarette lighters that cost $1,000 each. He took toilet paper and soap. 6 plane flights, okay? Some of the expenditures he did, he ended up, on paper he owned 1 helicopter, but he actually owned 13. He had Air Force One renovated, cost over $1 million. What do you call those people in Hollywood there, the makeup guys? A makeup artist told Johnson that one of his sides of his face was better than the other. So he refused all reporters and all newspaper people to take a picture of one side of, and when they did, he'd go absolutely apeshit. The taboo side of his face. He also, Frank Cormier, one of the journalists back then, and a good one, was taller than Johnson. Jim Garrison was taller than Johnson. And in both instances, when he met them and they were having pictures taken, he made them take a step down so they looked shorter. He said, "I don't want you looking taller than me," to both men at different times, okay? I love this one. Frank Cormier was on Air Force One, and he saw Sergeant Glynn, one of the pilots, removing Johnson's shoes and socks and bathing his naked foot, putting a fresh sock and replacing the shoe. I mean, you're into Caligula now. Caligula with a southern drawl, okay? He was going to a formal dinner, and he had another one dress him in formal dinnerwear, okay? Then he told the press, "You'll be able to write everything, of course. I may go into a strange bedroom every now and then, and I won't want you to write about that, but otherwise, you can write anything you want." And the newsman said, "He wants us to be cheerleaders." Didn't work, okay? I love this one. He's at a black tie reception at the State Department. Everybody's in tuxedos. And there were bowls of salted nuts, and he took a whole bowl and ate them all. Of course, now his hands are all salty, so he wiped his hands on the tails of the tuxedos in front of him.
Bipolar? Bipolar, you think?
Manic depressive, bipolar. There are like 3 or 4 shrinks who have written appraisals of him, and that's what they say, bipolar, manic depressive. I mean, I've got it all in great detail, but, we wouldn't have time to go through all of that. Okay, then we get this. I wrote the foreword to the paperback version of Phil Nelson's Who Killed Martin Luther King book, and I also wrote part of the introduction. And he said, I need a new introduction, a new foreword. And I said, well, I don't know that. I don't feel comfortable writing about the King assassination, but I can certainly tell you that one of the motivations is Johnson was a racist. He said, okay, go ahead, do it. So here's some of them. During the '64 Democratic Convention, they were showing the protesters outside, and he called up one of the heads of CBS or NBC and said, "Get your goddamn cameras off the niggers out front and back on the speaker stand inside." When he was a kid, he used to put snakes in his trunk and go to a black gas station and say he needed his spare tire fixed, and they'd open it up and scare the shit out of them with snakes. And then it'd say, well, blacks are scared of snakes. And of course, who isn't scared of snakes? You know, they'd be black, be scared of snakes. He said, I'm going to try to teach these Negroes that don't know anything how to work for themselves instead of just breeding. I'm going to try to teach these Mexicans who can't talk English to learn it so they can work for themselves and get off our taxpayers' backs. He wanted to appoint somebody to the Supreme Court, so he asked Larry Temple, one of Conley's aides, a suggestion. And Temple suggested Judge A. Leon Higginbotham, okay? And he said, the only two people who ever heard of Judge Higginbotham are you and his mama. When I appoint a nigger to the bench, I want everyone to know he's a nigger, okay? He also told Moyers, I'll tell you what's at the bottom of it. If you can convince the lowest white man he's better than the best colored man, he won't notice you're picking his pockets. Hell, give him somebody to look down on, and he'll empty his pockets for you. It might sound like another president. He was always against civil rights improvements. He passes the civil rights legislation because he wants to make it look like he's in with the Kennedys. And of course, it was time to do something. One of his quotes is, we have to give the goddamn niggers something. Okay? And I've got lots on the civil rights issue, but we just don't have time. He had a black, sir, 10 minutes? Okay. This is my last 10? Oh, shit. All right, I'm going to have to move on here. I do want to get to a couple things here. He had to get from the Capitol building to the White House in 15 minutes, and there was traffic. So he told the Secret Service agents to drive up on the curb. He said, I can't, there are pedestrians. He said, they'll jump out of the way, jump the curb. And he wouldn't do it. And he said, you're both fired. And he was vice president, so he couldn't fire them. All right, we have to do this one here. I have a lot of RFK things, but if you're not familiar with this one, you need to know this. Robert Kennedy has been shot, and he's dying. And aides for Bobby contact Hubert Humphrey and say, there's a brain surgeon in Boston, he's a specialist, can you get him an airplane and have him brought to California and maybe save Bobby Kennedy's life? And Hubert Humphrey got the plane. And I'll read what Ted Van Dyke, the aide, said. 10 minutes later, we received a call from an aide in the White House. President Johnson had canceled the plane because Humphrey had no authority to send it. The fact was, Johnson preferred Robert Kennedy dead. It was one of the most heinous acts I've ever experienced in my life, and it all but broke Humphrey's heart. Okay. All right. He was asked by a bunch of reporters, why are we in Vietnam? He pulled out his dick and said, this is why. Johnson had a kidney stone removed and the gallbladder removed, and he kept them in a box. And used to show them to people, hey, want to see me? Okay. Yeah, classy character. All right, let me see what I can do. This is from Dennis David, who was one of the chief of the day at Bethesda Naval Hospital today, one of my friends. And when he had his gallbladder out, they had just refurbished a brand new suite. And the Secret Service agents in Johnson, they broke the television, they burned cigar stubs into the wood, they broke tables. The cost was $50,000. Okay. Then, of course, you all know this, or most of you. He takes one of his beagles and pulls it up by the ears, and the thing screams, and he says he likes it. And then he did it 2 days later again, and the doctor says he could never admit he was wrong. He could never admit it. All right, let me see what else I need to do. I'm trying. Can you see what I'm passing? In the Watergate tapes, Haldeman, Dean, and Nixon are talking about bugging. Johnson bugged Goldwater's presidential offices and his plane. He had all of his speeches before Goldwater gave them. E. Howard Hunt was involved in all that shit. And then when he started talking about it, they were saying, was Humphrey aware of this? And Haldeman said, no, Johnson was bugging Humphrey too. And Richard Nixon went, well, goddamn. Even Johnson was amazed that Johnson was bugging his own vice president. Okay. Johnson's White House thought about putting marijuana in the rooms of Gene McCarthy's supporters. They wanted to put itching powder down where the barefooted protesters against Johnson were. Okay, these are things they considered didn't do. His philosophies. I never trust a man unless I have his pecker in my pocket. If you got him by the balls, their heart and mind will follow. He loved smoking, and he knew it was killing him, and he said, I'd rather have my pecker cut off. Okay? He was asked about Gerald Ford. Remember, don't shoot the messenger. Ford's economics is the worst thing that's happened to this country since pantyhose ruined finger fucking. I didn't write it. This guy Goldman said, I never see him doing anything outrageous. So Moyers grabbed him. He said, look, come in here. Look. And he's got one of those hospital things on with the back showing, and there were reporters there, and he's giving notes. His secretary's dictating notes. He's got 3 televisions on. Moyes is there, and he's trying to look. He said, what the hell's going on here? He was having an enema with like 15 people in the room watching it. Okay? General Earl Wheeler and the Joint Chiefs of Staff met with Johnson, and Lieutenant General Cooper was there, and Cooper wrote about it, and they gave him a very sensible way to get out of Vietnam, stop, do this, do that, do this. I just don't have time for it. And instead of going with it, he started screaming and yelling at them, calling them assholes and shitholes, And some of these military men said, if he had done what they wanted, maybe 55, 58 million kids wouldn't be dead. Let's see here. Of course, the protests were out there. LBJ, no more ugly children. Sterilize them, hang LBJ by the ears after the Beagle situation. And now, is Lisa here? She's not here? Okay, I'm going to quote Jim DiEugenio. She could bring that back to Jim. This is Dr. Newman's area, but I do want to read these. If I had to end here, I would at least get this in. I do want to read my ending. Please let me read my ending. Jim DiEugenio wrote, Kennedy's attempt to withdraw from Vietnam was first stopped and then reversed in 3 months. With NSAM 288 in March '64, President Johnson signed off on battle plans for a huge air war against North Vietnam. In other words, what Kennedy refused to do for 3 years, LBJ did in 3 months. Less than 18 months after Kennedy's death, Johnson inserted combat troops into Vietnam, something Kennedy had never contemplated and specifically rejected 8 specific times. This would result in the deaths of over 2 million Vietnamese and 58,000 Americans. John Judge, whose mother worked in the Pentagon, wrote the following. My mother, 5 levels above top security, a manpower analyst for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who projected their annual draft call figures 5 years ahead, was told to change her projections for the first time in her career in April of '63 on orders of Kennedy in the White House to plan a full withdrawal of American troops by the end of '64. Then on November 25th, the Monday following the assassination, she was told by the Joint Chiefs to revise her figures upward for the Vietnam War, based on escalation of troops and attrition levels provided by the Office of Plans and Operations, which she found so incredible, she took them to the Joint Chiefs office and challenged them. She was told to use the figure in her projections for a 10-year war with 57,000 American dead and more wounded. Her projections had to be right for an annual draft call of thousands within 100 people either way, 5 years ahead. And then I'm going to quote Oliver Stone in his brilliant television series, The Untold History of the United States. This is near the end of the episode, JFK to the Brink, the JFK one. Mr. Stone showed a short clip of JFK's inaugural speech where he says, to friend and foe alike, the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans. And then Stone, as a narrator, said, but with his murder, the torch was passed back to an old generation, the generation of Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and Reagan, leaders who would systematically destroy the promise of Kennedy's last year as they returned the country to war and regression, or repression, okay? I have a lot of quotes from a lot of really famous writers who just ripped the hell out of him. One of them, he had a pool with a plastic cover over it, and he had peacocks. And he loved his peacocks, but the peacocks kept going over to the pool. So this poor aide there, he's got to shoo the peacocks away. And they're screaming. And Johnson comes out, what the fuck are you doing? You know, and they're pecking holes in his plastic cover, which is what he doesn't want. And the guy said, you couldn't win with the guy. How the hell am I going to do this? It's either peacocks or the pool cover. You know, it's just kind of a metaphor for it all. He actually once said to Bill Gully, just you remember that there are only two kinds at the White House. There's elephants and there's pissants, and I'm the only elephant. Okay. What else when I get here? I have to skip over this stuff. Eric Goldman does priceless evaluations of him, but this one's worthwhile. Lyndon Johnson could win votes, enact laws, maneuver mountains. He could not acquire that something beyond, which cannot be won, enacted, or maneuvered, but must be freely given. He could not command the respect, affection, and rapport, which alone permitted an American president genuinely to lead. In his periods of triumph and of down sweep, in peace as in war, he stood the tragic figure of an extraordinary gifted president who was the wrong man from the wrong place at the wrong time under the wrong circumstances. I've got quotes from Goldwater, but he wants me to wrap it up. I didn't get to it, but you can read about the pilot, James Stockwell, at the Gulf of Tonkin said, there were no boats, no planes, no bombs, it's all bullshit. And he and McNamara just made it up. And there's all kinds of other military experts have looked into it, and there's all kinds of documents which would have exposed it that even the White House and the Pentagon didn't get. So somebody really powerful was pushing the lie. Ellsberg knew about it, and so forth. I guess, let me do two things. Two? Okay, thank you. Just as recent, Abraham Bolden, the Secret Service agent who was thrown in jail for phony charges, I became friends with Abraham. And January of 2023, he put out an email to me and a few others, and he was the guard at the Oval Office, and he could hear Kennedy, Johnson, and Robert Kennedy arguing in the thing. And he could hear LBJ saying, you bastards trying to send me to jail? And when he came out of the door, he said, you all better stop fucking with me, you sons of bitches. And he said, all over for some goddamn cotton. That's the Billy Celeste scandal. Now, I knew Billy Celeste well, okay? By the way, those who don't know it, he had a little chihuahua. I said, what's his name, Billy? He said, Ladybird. Okay? So it's here. I mean, you know, that's in black and white there about the bit. I mean, he's threatening them to their faces. All right, I've done the best I can. There's a lot of missing. You really should buy this newest issue of Garrison Magazine, but let me finish with this little sheet. I'm glad I got this in. Years ago, I won't name him, years ago, one researcher troll, a poo of little brain, talked to me for 5 minutes at a JFK conference in Dallas, Texas, then soon after posted an internet site, an appraisal of me, all the while giving his readers the impression that he had known and interacted with me for years. He criticized me for really hating Lyndon Johnson. Fortunately, a wiser veteran researcher, who ironically did not know me at all, countered by responding, what's not to hate? Lyndon Baines Johnson truly was Caligula with a southern drawl. He was void of love and empathy, and his overwhelming insecurities and paranoia and jealousies made it impossible for him to attain any sincere popularity or respect. It was self-evident that instilling fear and manipulating people via quid pro quo and/or blackmailing tactics dominated his manic thinking processes. If one compares his criminal schemes to those political contemporaries, he made corrupt politicians like Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford look like amateurs and fools. Johnson was obsessed and addicted to excessive sex, booze, cigarettes, revenge, murders included, and above all else, mean-spirited control. Anyone who shoots an armadillo for the hell of it and torments hapless cows and lovable beagles, and I own 2 purebred beauties in my lifetime, Hambone and Bingo, is nothing but a Neanderthal sadist. It is immensely difficult to gauge, much less comprehend, the narcissistic entitlement of a wretched man who derived malicious and vindictive pleasure out of bullying and intimidating and insulting his own aides and protectors and working staff members for minor or non-existent infractions. It is impossible to fathom the depth of recklessness he exhibited on a daily basis in the White House. And if one is judged by the company one keeps, his closest associates, John Connally, Cliff Carter, Walter Jenkins, Leon Jaworski, Jack Valenti, Bill Moyers, Bobby Baker, Fred Korth, I'll talk about that creep tomorrow, Sarah Hughes, Marvin Wobson, Abe Fortas, Robert McNamara, Roswell Gilpatrick, and I'll be talking about him tomorrow, Jim Bishop, John Kofa, Mike Howard, Malcolm Wallace, Barefoot Sanders, Howard Burris, Ed Clark, J. Edgar Hoover, Cartha DeLoach, James Rowley, Alan Spector, and Alan Dulles were almost just as nefarious and twisted and amoral and hypocritical as he was, just for conspiring and colluding with him. Some acclaimed historians sheepishly admit that there was a dark side to LBJ, but such an understated admission is euphemistic at best. One lame apologist described him, this is Robert Dallek, as a flawed giant, but in reality, he was a horrid menace, a disgraceful giant flaw in American history. His notorious credibility gap became a bottomless pit of continual deception. Lyndon Baines Johnson was the personification of a political and societal black hole, a Macbeth without a conscience, the Edward Hyde of his era, who wreaked havoc and anguish and death upon America and the whole world. He truly was the master of outrageous acts, and he has now been dead for 50 years, and we, the survivors, are better off that he is gone. What's not to hate indeed? Thank you very much. Sure.
If you have a question, raise your hand. David will bring the microphone over so that people on Zoom can hear it as well.
It helps to be an English teacher. That's what Madeline Brown needed, someone to edit her book. I said, what you need is a Kennedy assassination researcher who's also an English teacher. She said, you got the job.
With all the research you've done and the information you have you ever considered writing a book?
I've got a 1,400-page manuscript, but there are things in it that are wrong, that I've learned that are wrong. There are things I need to add. I don't think I'm going to do it. I don't want to be sued. After I was on the Guilty Man on the History Channel, I was threatened. I've had my income tax audited, my mail tampered with. People I know have been murdered. I'm not really concerned about that part, but what I'm doing is I'm actually, right now, I'm putting it out piecemeal in Garrison Magazine. Ruby, TFX, I wrote one about, I knew Earl Ruby personally. I wrote about Earl Ruby. I wrote about a Korean military and intelligence agent in Korea who saw files a year before Kennedy. He was asked to look up files on his sergeant, Riley, said, go in these files and look up the following people. A year before the assassination, he had to look up Lee Harvey Oswald, Harvey Lee Oswald, Richard Nagel, George de Warnchill, Jean LeGond. A year before. And he writes up the report, he gives it to his man. He said, what do you think? He said, very interesting. He said, do you have any idea who it's for? I said, no. He said, do you know Earl Wheeler? Yeah. He said, Joint Chiefs of Staff? Yeah. He said, do you know Marshall Carter? He said, no. Well, Marshall Carter was the acting head of the CIA after Dulles was bumped out. And in '65, Johnson made him head of the NSA. And Dr. Newman can tell you, and Malcolm Blunt knows it, that the NSA had surveillance on Earl Ruby, Jack Ruby, and Oswald before the assassination. So the CIA gets a lot of rep, but he knows the CIA and the NSA stuff. And we had a conference at Harvard in 1993, and one of the women helping, doing all the clerical work and everything, and I didn't know who she was, and I got her name, and I ran it by that military intelligence guy I knew. So her name, what was her name? I said, Mary Prio Nichols. He said, what? I said, Mary Prio Nichols. He said, that's Marshall Carter's daughter. What the hell is she doing? At a Kennedy assassination conference. Anyway, so, you know, I'm writing one on Jerry Patrick Hemming now. There's a story. They say some of Jerry's stuff is plausible, some of it's possible, and a lot of it's moonshine. And the questions, remember you used to say it about the Farewell America book, shit and candy. And that's Jerry Hemming. Yeah.
I had one point. Mort Saul has been a friend of mine for many years, and he told me about a meeting he was present at with on a Sunday morning. Lyndon and Bill Moyers and others were getting together for a coffee clutch. And as everybody was going to start eating and drinking, Moyers starts to say, "Grace." And Johnson yells up, "Speak up, I can't hear you." And Moyers looks at him and says, "I wasn't talking to you."
There you go. I mean, one time RFK at a cabinet meeting said to one of the cabinet members, please tell the vice president to shut up. I mean, those two are bad news, real bad news.
Thank you for all your insights and facts, but how do you reconcile this with Thurgood Marshall's opinion of Johnson?
Thurgood Marshall was an FBI informant. I don't think Thurgood Marshall is all that everybody cracks him up to be. And that's documented. Now, I don't know the specifics, but that would be a nice thing for research to look into. I know, boy, that's the first time I got a Thurgood Marshall question.
Andy's the one who got him going. He was appointed Solicitor General.
Yeah,
Johnson just took that and ran with it.
yeah. Well, you know, he wasn't going to vote for Higginbotham, that's for sure.
Because Kennedy did it?
What was that?
As Kennedy was dead, he wanted to be able to have a lineage of civil rights. Just like he took the civil rights credit when Kennedy was the one who had it in committee before he was killed. It was gonna pass the next year anyhow.
All right.
Okay,
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Ed Tatro. Did you enjoy that? Isn't he something? I remember when I first became aware of Ed Tatro, I think it was like 9 years ago, and he would always sit outside of the conferences and talk and hold court and tell people about it. And I really didn't know who he was for a while. And then I sat in on some of them like, oh my gosh, this guy has been around. And I don't think anything has changed. You still love to sit and talk with people individually, don't you, or small groups? So if you find him outside, you know, feel free to pick his brain because he has had so many experiences. He knows so much about so many things around the various assassinations. He's really a wealth, and I'm grateful that you're back here, Ed.
it's been 60 years, we lost, but we can have Pyrrhic victories, we can promote critical thinking, we can plant seeds, you know, that kind of thing. You fight the good fight anyway, just like I said in the guilty men. Thanks, go on.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Ed Tatro.